John F. Kennedy loved life. He loved people. A devoted father and husband, and with a deft hand in turning a phrase either for force or for humor, he spoke at Yale University. A graduate of Harvard, he had just received a degree from his alma mater's traditional Ivy League rival. With humor and feeling, he said,
"It might be said now that I have the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree. I am particularly glad to become a Yale man because as I think about my troubles, I find that a lot of them have come from other Yale men. It is true and of high importance that the prosperity of this country depends on the assurance that all major elements within it will live up to their responsibilities. If business were to neglect its obligations to the public, if labor will be blind to all public responsibility, above all, if government were to abandon its obvious and statutory duty of watchful concern for our economic health, if any of these things should happen, then confidence might well be weakened, and the danger of stagnation would increase. This is the true issue of confidence."
From humor, he turned on October of 1962 to a crisis that sprang full-grown on the American public. The nation had come to know even more and to love even more this young and vigorous man and his family. Now, a new side of John F. Kennedy came to the fore. He spoke to the nation and the world on radio and TV, and without fear, but with determination and strength, he told of the Russian arms buildup in Cuba. Traffic across the nation thinned and then stopped as millions watched and listened. Department stores grew quiet. Food, untasted, became cold and tasteless as patrons of restaurants listened to their leader. Not since Pearl Harbor had the nation heard such strong and forceful words uttered by a chief executive. They learned of a threat to them, and they heard their president take a firm stand that did not call for peace in our time, but with bravery and dignity threw down the gauntlet and declared the ultimatum.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. The characteristic of these new missile sites indicate two distinct types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. Additional sites not yet completed appear to be designed for intermediate range ballistic missiles, capable of traveling more than twice as far, and thus capable of striking most of the major cities in the Western Hemisphere. This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long-range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas. Soviet government publicly stated on September 11th that, and I quote, "The armaments and military equipment sent to Cuba are designed exclusively for defensive purposes," unquote. That there is, and I quote the Soviet government, There is no need for the Soviet government to shift its weapons for a retaliatory blow to any other country, for instance, Cuba, unquote. And that, and I quote the government, the Soviet Union has so powerful rockets to carry these nuclear warheads that there is no need to search for sites for them beyond the boundaries of the Soviet Union, unquote. That statement was false. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, unquote. That, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. The 1930s taught us a clear lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war. We are also true to our word. Our unswerving objective, therefore, must be to prevent the use of these missiles against this or any other country, and to secure their withdrawal or elimination from the Western Hemisphere. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace. Let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission.
And so the ultimatum delivered, the nation watched and waited, knowing they were in the right. And the Navy turned back the ships on the high seas, and the missiles were dismantled and disarmed. The long journey back to from whence they had come began. And a nation strong under his leadership was proud. Of all things that John F. Kennedy felt most keenly was the inhumanity of inequality, the ugly horror of prejudice, wherever and whenever it came to light. And so, in November of 1962, less than 1 year before his tragic assassination, he spoke out on this subject.
There are too many areas of our country where there isn't equal opportunity, where people are inadequately paid, where they work too long, where their rights are not guaranteed. And as long as that's true, there's a need for the American labor movement. So that I ask you today to join in an old cause and a new one. And that is to make sure that in the ranks of labor, labor itself practices what it preaches. This is true of labor. It must be true of all of us. It must be true of the national government. We must make sure that in our employment practices in the national government, in all grades, that we practice what we preach, that we make it possible not only to permit equal opportunity, but also to encourage it, to not merely treat all those who apply to us equally, but to make sure that we invite and encourage and stimulate equal opportunity. That requires some work.
4 months had passed since he had made his speech of warning to Cuba and the Soviet Union. At one of his well-known press conferences, he was asked about the Cuba situation and what the current status was as of that moment. That moment being in February of 1963. On this, he said,
We cannot base the issue of war and peace on a rumor or report, which is not substantiated, or which some member of Congress refuses to tell us where he heard it. This issue involves very definitely war and peace, and when you talk about the presence of offensive weapons there, if they are there, I think the Soviet Union is aware, and Cuba is aware, that we would be back where we were in October, but in a far more concentrated way. Now, if you're talking about that, and talking about the kinds of actions which would come from that, it seems to me we ought to know what we're talking about. Now, it may be that there are hidden away some missiles. Nobody can prove that they're, in the finite sense, that they're not there, or they might be brought in. But they're going to have to be erected. And we continue complete surveillance. They have to be moved. They have to be put onto pads. They have to be prepared to fire. And quite obviously, if the Soviet Union did that, it would indicate that they were prepared to take the chance of another great encounter between us with all the dangers. Now, they had those missiles on the pads, and they withdrew them. So the United States is not powerless in the area of Cuba. But I do think we should keep our heads and attempt to use the best information we have. We've got, I think as Secretary McNamara demonstrated, we're taking the greatest pains to try to be accurate. But we have to deal with facts as we know them and not merely rumors and speculation. Now, as I say, these things may all come about, and we may find ourselves again with the Soviet Union toe-to-toe. But we ought to know what we have in our hands before we bring the United States and ask our allies to come with us to the brink again.
John F. Kennedy was a devoted believer in civil rights and in human dignity. He hesitated not one moment in throwing the entire force of the federal government in backing up these rights. As he entered the last 6 months of his life, he reported to the nation honestly, sincerely, and with great emotional dignity the results of the strife that had torn at the very Constitution of the United States, and the steps that he, as chief executive, had taken to ensure the upholding of this most sacred document.
I'm gratified to note the progress in the effort by white and Negro citizens to end an ugly situation in Birmingham, Alabama. I've made it clear since assuming the presidency that I would use all available means to protect human rights and uphold the law of the land. Through mediation and persuasion, and where that effort has failed, through lawsuits and court actions, we have attempted to meet our responsibilities in this most difficult field where federal court orders have been circumvented, ignored, or violated. We have committed all the power of the federal government to ensure respect and obedience of court decisions and the law of the land. In the city of Birmingham, the Department of Justice some time ago instituted an investigation into voting discrimination. It supported in the Supreme Court an attack on the city's segregation ordinances. We have, in addition, been watching the present controversy to detect any violation of the federal civil rights or other statutes. In the absence of such violations or any other federal jurisdiction, our efforts have been focused on getting both sides together to settle in a peaceful fashion the very real abuses too long inflicted on the Negro citizens of that community. Assistant Attorney General Burt Marshall, representing the Attorney General and myself on the scene, has made every possible effort to halt a spectacle which was seriously damaging the reputation of both Birmingham and the country. Today, as the result of responsible effort on the part of both white and Negro leaders over the last 72 hours, the business community of Birmingham has responded in a constructive and commendable fashion and pledged that substantial steps would begin to meet the justifiable needs
of the Negro community. Negro leaders have announced suspension of their demonstration. And when the newly elected mayor, who has indicated his desire to resolve these problems, takes office, the city of Birmingham has committed itself wholeheartedly to continuing progress in this area. While much remains to be settled before the situation can be termed satisfactory, we can hope that tensions will ease and that this case history, which has so far only narrowly avoided widespread violence and fatalities, will remind every state, every community, and every citizen how urgent it is that all bars to equal opportunity and treatment be removed as promptly as possible. I urge the local leaders of Birmingham, both white and Negro, to continue their constructive and cooperative efforts.
Each of us has an appointment in Samara to keep. We cannot avoid it. John F. Kennedy's was in Dallas, Texas, on November 22nd, 1963. And had he known, he would not have deviated 1 inch from his chosen path. A path leading to a rendezvous with destiny, punctuated by an assassin's cruel bullet. Despite warnings from Ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai E. Stevenson, that the emotional climate in Dallas was one of danger, he nonetheless kept to his plan. Looking, if anything, younger and more vibrant than ever, he made a short speech in Fort Worth. Only 27 miles from his destiny, he said, "We would like to live," as truly he would have. Now, only hours from his final and fateful Dallas visit, John F. Kennedy, mindful and prideful of his courageous and beautiful wife by his side, made his final speech.
We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. The communist balance of power is still strong. The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone and the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty. I'm confident, as I look to the future, that our chances for security, our chances for peace, are better than they've been in the past. And the reason is because we're stronger. And with that strength is a determination to not only maintain the peace, but also the vital interests of the United States. To that great cause, Texas and the United States are committed. Thank you.
And so the journey began. The flight of 27 miles, the cars at the Dallas airport, the dignitaries, and the fateful motorcade began. The details of what followed are well known and have been faithfully chronicled. John F. Kennedy was called upon to give that last full measure of devotion that so few find necessary to give. But give it he did, and with courage. The shot rang out, and the mill of the gods ground exceedingly fine that sad day in Dallas. A shot that stilled for all time one of the best-known voices among the many that have echoed down the long corridors of history. And he was gone. Gone was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States of America, American, father, husband, leader. Gone to join his brother and sister, to join his 2 children who never knew the giant that was their father. Gone to join all the greats of history, and equally the plain and simple people that he loved, because they were only that. and because of their inborn dignity. Left behind a widow, beautiful, dignified, and with majesty in her sorrow. 2 small children that the world had come to know and to love, as he had. And the nation left grieving a lost leader and champion. And a world that sorrowed openly for a brave and fearless man. A determined fighter for the right and the integrity and the dignity of all men. Only one thing left. A proclamation written November 4th, signed November 5th, but never delivered. Thanksgiving Day, 1963, found a nation sorrowing and with little to be thankful for, other than the grateful thanks to God for the too short 1,037 days in office of John F. Kennedy, and thanks to God for there having been a John F. Kennedy. So here, as broadcast posthumously to a grieving nation, the final act of a brave and noble and a gentle man, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Almost a week has passed since the tragic death of the late President Kennedy. And on this Thanksgiving Day, the nation and the world still mourns its loss. And it seems appropriate that today we read the text of the Thanksgiving Day proclamation, which was signed by the late President Kennedy on November 4th. These are his words on Thanksgiving. Over 3 centuries ago, our forefathers in Virginia and in Massachusetts, far from home in a lonely wilderness, set aside a time for Thanksgiving. On the appointed day, they gave reverent thanks for their safety, for the health of their children, for the fertility of their fields, for the laws which bound them together, and for the faith which united them under their God. So too, when the colonies achieved their independence, our first president, in the first year of his first administration, proclaimed November 26, 1789, as a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God, and called upon the people of the new republic to beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions, to promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue, and generally grant unto all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as he alone knows to be best. And so too, in the midst of America's tragic Civil War, President Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday of November, 1863, as a day to renew our gratitude for America's fruitful fields, for our national strength and vigor, and for our singular deliverance and blessings. Much time has passed since the first colonists came to rocky shores and dark forests of an unknown continent. Much time since President Washington led a young people into the experience of nationhood. Much time since President Lincoln saw the American nation through the ordeal of fraternal war. And in these years, our population, our plenty, and our power have all grown apace. Today, we are a nation of nearly 200 million souls, stretching from coast to coast, on into the Pacific and north toward the Arctic. A nation enjoying the fruits of an ever-expanding agriculture and industry, and achieving standards of living unknown in previous history. We give our humble thanks for this. Yet, as our power has grown, so has our peril. Today we give our thanks most of all for the ideals of honor and faith we inherit from our forefathers, for the decency of purpose, steadfastness of resolve, and strength of will, for the courage and the humility which they possessed and which we must seek every day to emulate. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. Let us therefore proclaim our gratitude to Providence for manifold blessings. Let us be humbly thankful for inherited ideals, and let us resolve to share those blessings and those ideals with our fellow human beings throughout the world. Now, therefore, I, John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, in consonance with the joint resolution of Congress approved December the 26th, 1941, designating the fourth Thursday of November in each year as Thanksgiving Day, do hereby proclaim Thursday, November 28, 1963, as a day of national thanksgiving. On that day, let us gather in sanctuaries dedicated to worship and in homes blessed by family affection to express our gratitude for the glorious gifts of God. And let us earnestly and humbly pray that He will continue to guide and sustain us in the great unfinished tasks of achieving peace, justice, and understanding among all men and all nations, and of ending misery and suffering wherever they exist. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the great seal of the United States of America to be affixed. Done in the city of Washington, this fourth day of November in the year of our Lord 1963, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 188th. Signed by the President, John F. Kennedy. Those were his words on Thanksgiving, a proclamation signed by the late President Kennedy on November 4th and issued on November 5th.